You're standing in your kitchen, the kettle's roaring, the heater's ticking away down the hall, and somewhere on the bench sits a bill you're almost frightened to open. I know that feeling. I lived it for years. But here's what took me the better part of 60 years to work out. You are not paying for the heat you use. You're paying for the heat you lose. Every single day, the money leaks straight out of your home while you're told to use less, wear another jumper, and feel guilty about it. This isn't a theory I dreamed up. It's an old Australian way of doing things, kept alive by bush cooks, wartime housewives, and country women's association ladies who could feed a family on almost nothing. And I'm going to prove it to you. Because buried in a newspaper demonstration from 1917, in a suburb of Sydney, there's a $1 trick that quietly cuts a household's cooking and heating costs, and it works in a rented flat just as well as it works on a farm. I first saw it with my own eyes out in the Mallee, at a mate's father's place, when I watched the old fella pull a steaming pot roast out of a wooden box that had no heat, no power, and no fire under it at all. I laughed at him. Turns out he was right, and I was the mug paying full price. So let me tell you what I got wrong, and what I know now. For most of my adult life, I believed the same thing you probably believe right now. I believed that a power bill was a simple thing. You turn on an appliance, it uses power, you pay for the power. Use more, pay more. Use less, pay less. Simple, fair. That's the story we've all been told, and it sounds so reasonable that nobody questions it. But that story has a hole in it big enough to drive a truck through. Because here's the part nobody explains. Most of the energy you buy never does the job you bought it for. You heat a pot of stew, and the moment you turn the stove off, that heat starts pouring out into the room. You heat a tank of water, and it starts going cold the second the element clicks off. You warm a room, and the warmth escapes through the ceiling, the windows, the gaps under your doors, faster than you can replace it. You're not buying heat, you're renting it. And it's got a leak. Let me put a number on it, because numbers are what finally woke me up. In the average Australian home, heating and hot water together make up somewhere around half of the entire electricity bill. Think about that. Half. Not the telly, not the lights, not the fridge. Heat. And a huge slice of that heat is gone within minutes of you making it, because nothing in a modern home is built to hold on to it. Now, when I first heard that, I thought the answer was to buy a better appliance, a fancier heater, a more efficient hot water system, a machine with a 5-star sticker on it, and a price tag to match. That's what we've all been trained to do. Something's costing you money? Buy a newer, shinier version of the thing that's costing you money. And I did exactly that. I spent good money chasing efficiency ratings. It barely moved the needle, because I was solving the wrong problem. I was buying better ways to make heat when my real problem was that I had no way to keep it. That's the lie sitting underneath your whole power bill. The idea that the answer is always a new machine. The idea that saving money must cost money first. It's a beautiful little trap, and I was stuck in it for decades. But the old-timers weren't stuck in it, and that's what got under my skin. The people who had the least money, in the hardest years this country ever went through, worked out how to hold heat instead of chasing it. They didn't have the cash to waste, so they couldn't afford to be fooled. So I started asking why. Why did we forget something so simple? Why does nobody talk about holding heat, only about making it? And the deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't an accident. Somebody profits every single time your heat escapes. Think about who's on the other end of that leak. Every degree of warmth that slips out through your ceiling. Every drop of hot water that goes cold in the tank overnight. Every pot that cools on the stove. All of it has to be replaced. And you replace it by buying more power. The leak isn't a flaw in the system. For the people selling you the power, the leak is the whole business. I'm not saying there's a fella in a suit rubbing his hands together over your drafty windows. I'm saying the entire way we've been taught to think about energy, make more, use less, buy the efficient machine, keeps your attention pointed at the tap while it ignores the hole in the bucket. And a home that leaks heat is a home that keeps paying, month after month, year after year, forever. Here's where it really started to sting for me. I worked out that the difference between a home that holds heat and a home that leaks it isn't the size of the house or the age of the appliances. It comes down to insulation and retained heat, two things our grandparents understood in their bones, and we've somehow been talked out of. Let me give you the clearest example I ever came across, because it's the one that made me feel like a right fool. Your hot water system. For a lot of Australian homes, that tank is the single biggest energy user in the house. Bigger than the heater. Bigger than anything. And most of us have one sitting outside, up against a wall, exposed to the wind, heating water all day and all night, then losing that heat straight into the cold air around it. The element clicks on, warms the water cools, the element clicks on again, round and round. And every one of those cycles is money. Now here's the thing that made my jaw drop. The bush way of dealing with this is over 100 years old, it costs almost nothing, and it's exactly what the old girls did with their cooking pots and their washing coppers. You don't heat harder, you wrap. You insulate the thing so the heat you've already paid for stays where you put it. And this is where I have to tell you about the Fireless cooker, because once you understand it, you'll never look at your stove the same way again. Picture Australia during the First World War. Fuel was short. Coal, wood, kerosene, all of it was needed for the war effort, and families were being asked to make do with less of everything. Money was tight in a way that makes our cost of living squeeze look gentle. And in the middle of all that, an old idea came roaring back into fashion. They called it the Fireless cooker. Some called it the hay box, and it was the talk of the town. I found the proof of just how big it was. In 1917, the newspapers in Sydney were running demonstrations and descriptions of these Fireless cookers, showing housewives how to build one and use it. This wasn't some fringe crank idea. It was being promoted as a patriotic, practical way to feed your family while using a fraction of the fuel. The Country Women's Association ladies took it up. It appeared in cookery columns and household handbooks right through the 1920s and into the 1930s. So what on earth is it? It's the simplest thing in the world, and that's exactly why it works. You take your pot of food, a stew, a curry, a porridge, a pot of dried beans, whatever you like. You bring it to the boil on the stove, the normal way, and you let it bubble for just a few minutes. 5-10 minutes, just long enough to get everything good and hot right through. Then you turn the stove off, completely off, and you take that hot pot and you bury it in insulation. In the old days, it was a wooden box packed tight with hay, which is where the name comes from. You'd nestle the pot down into the hay, pack more hay over the top, close the lid, and walk away. And here's the magic. The food keeps cooking, for hours. That trapped heat has nowhere to go, so it stays hot enough to slowly, gently cook your dinner right through, with not one more scrap of fuel burnt. You'd put your stew in of a morning, go out and do your work, and come home to a meal that had cooked itself all day for the price of 10 minutes on the stove. When my mate's father showed me his, out in the Mallee, that's exactly what he'd done. Boiled it up at breakfast, packed it in the box, and pulled a perfect, falling-apart pot roast out at tea time. And the stove had been off since morning. I'd stood there thinking he was a stubborn old coot living in the past. He was actually spending a fraction of what I was on the exact same meal. The old-timers understood something we've forgotten. Most of the energy in cooking isn't spent cooking. It's spent replacing the heat that keeps escaping out of an open pot on a hot ring. Stop the escape, and you barely need the ring at all. Now I know what a lot of you are thinking right about now. That's all very well for a bloke on a farm with a shed full of hay and a big kitchen. But I live in a unit. I rent. I've got a tiny kitchen and a landlord who won't let me change a thing. This is all lovely, but it's not for me. Stop right there. Because this next part is for you especially. This is the bit that finally convinced me the old ways aren't just for people with land, and it's the reason I couldn't keep quiet about it. You do not need a farm. You do not need hay. You do not need to own your home or change a single fixed thing in it. Everything I'm about to tell you works in the smallest rented flat in the country, with gear you already own or can get for $1. Let's start with that Fireless cooker, the flat dweller's version. You don't need a wooden box packed with hay. You need an old woolen blanket and a cardboard box, or even just an esky, that cooler you take to the beach. Bring your pot to the boil on the stove, let it bubble a few minutes, put the lid on tight, and then wrap it. Wrap it thick in that old wool blanket, tuck it into the esky or the box, pile more blanket or towels on top, and shut it. That's it. That's the whole thing. A $1 blanket from an op shop does the exact same job as a box of hay did in 1917. I did this the first time with a pot of dried chickpeas, half not believing it would work. Boiled them for 10 minutes, wrapped them in a doubled-over blanket inside a cardboard box, and left them on the bench. 3 hours later they were soft, cooked right through. Perfect. My stove had been off the whole time. I sat there looking at that pot like it owed me an apology for all the years I'd wasted. And maybe that's you right now, standing over a humming stove or a cooling pot, wondering how much of that heat you paid for is already sneaking out the door. That's exactly why I put everything I've worked out into a collection called Aussie Basics, along with Deep Thrift and the full system. Plain old Australian methods that show you how to cook warming meals with far less power, keep milk, butter, and eggs fresh with little or no power, and trap heat in your home the way our grandparents did, without buying a single new appliance. There's even a preserving calendar and a pantry checklist you can print and stick on the fridge, so it becomes a simple weekly routine instead of a guessing game. And you don't have to take my word for any of it. Tonight, boil up a pot of beans, wrap it thick in a blanket inside a box, walk away for 3 hours, and see for yourself that the food finished cooking on no power at all. The fastest way to get the books is to scan the QR code right there on your screen, or go to the link in the description, or the pinned comment. And here's the honest reason to start now. That heat is leaking out of your home every single day you wait, and the cold months don't ask permission. But before you go anywhere, let me tell you exactly what I got wrong, because it's the same thing you probably believe right this minute. And it's not just cooking. Take your hot water. If your tank is inside and you can safely get to it, an insulating jacket, even just wrapping the exposed pipes with cheap foam lagging you by the meter, keeps the heat in the water you've already paid to warm. Those first pipes coming off the tank leak heat like nothing else, and covering them costs a few dollars and takes 10 minutes. You're not making more hot water. You're keeping the hot water you made from going cold and forcing the system to work again. Then there's the room you actually sit in of an evening. Here's a bush truth that cost me nothing and changed my winters. You don't heat a house, you heat a person. The old settlers knew this. They didn't try to warm every cubic foot of a draughty timber cottage. They warmed the spot where the family sat, and they stopped the drafts. So find where your cold air comes in. Run your hand along the bottom of your doors, around your windows, at the edges of the room. You'll feel the draft, cold air sneaking in low. A rolled-up towel, or an old draft snake made from a stuffed stocking, or a leg of an old pair of trousers, jammed along the bottom of the door, stops that cold river dead. It costs nothing. My grandmother had one on every door, and I thought it was just an old habit. It was engineering. And a heavy curtain, even a spare blanket tacked or clipped over a window at night, traps a layer of still air against the cold glass and stops the warmth being sucked out through the pane. Glass is one of the worst heat thieves in your home, and a thick cover over it after dark makes a difference you can feel within the hour. None of this needs a tradesman. None of it needs the landlord's permission. None of it needs a 5-star sticker or a payment plan. It's a blanket, a box, a towel, and a bit of foam. That's the whole toolkit. And every one of those tricks is holding heat instead of chasing it. Here's the part that gets me, though. If this is so simple, so cheap, and so effective, Why doesn't anyone tell you? Why did I have to be shown by an old fella in the Mallee instead of learning it as a matter of course? Because there's no money in it for anyone but you. Nobody sells you a fortune's worth of blanket. There's no monthly subscription to a towel under the door. There's no service contract on an esky full of chickpeas. Every dollar this saves is a dollar that stays in your pocket instead of flowing off to be billed and rebilled. This knowledge doesn't survive because nobody stands to profit from teaching it to you, so it slowly got pushed to the back of the cupboard and forgotten while we all learned to reach for the newer, more expensive answer instead. But it did survive. In one place. And that's the buried proof I promised you. Because I wanted more than a mate's word and an old memory. I wanted to know if anyone had ever actually measured this properly. Put real numbers on retained heat cooking instead of just old wives passing it down. And that's where the story goes from a nice bush trick to something that genuinely stopped me in my tracks. The Fireless cooker wasn't just a wartime fad that people did on faith. Back when it was being promoted through those 1917 demonstrations and in the household handbooks that followed, it was tested and written up in plain figures. The old cookery manuals and the Country Women's Association records set it out clearly. A properly packed Fireless cooker only needed the food brought to the boil and held there for a short spell before the fuel could be shut off entirely, with the retained heat finishing the job over the following hours. The numbers they quoted were extraordinary. They reckoned a good Fireless cooker cut the fuel needed to cook a meal by well over half. Some accounts put the fuel saving at around 80% for the right dishes. The slow ones, the stews and the porridges, and the puddings, and the dried pulses that make up the cheapest, most filling meals you can put on a table. Sit with that for a second. 80%, not 8%. Not some marginal saving you'd need a spreadsheet to notice. 4/5 of the cooking fuel for those meals. Gone. Replaced by nothing but a box and some insulation. That's not a lifestyle tweak. That's the difference between dreading your bill and shrugging at it. And it lines up exactly with the science of what heat actually is and how it moves. Heat doesn't want to sit in your pot. It wants to spread out, to even itself into the cooler air all around it. And it does that constantly, the whole time your stove is on, which is why you have to keep feeding it energy just to stay level. The instant you wrap that pot in thick insulation, you slow that spreading almost to a stop. The heat's still in there. It's got nowhere to go. So it does the only thing left to it. It keeps cooking your food, gently, for hours, on energy you already bought and paid for. That's the whole secret. That's the $1 truth. The people telling you to make more heat have been pointing you at the tap. The old Australians were quietly fixing the hole in the bucket the entire time. So here's what I want you to do this weekend, because this is something you can actually try before you even open another bill. Pick a slow meal, a stew, a curry, a pot of dried beans or lentils, a porridge for the morning. Bring it up to a rolling boil on the stove and let it go for 10 minutes with the lid on tight. Then turn the stove off. Wrap that pot thick in an old woolen blanket. Tuck it into an esky or a cardboard box. Pile more on top and shut the lid. Walk away for 3 or 4 hours, then open it up. I promise you, the first time you lift that lid and find a fully cooked, steaming meal that finished itself on no power at all, something's going to click in your head the way it clicked in mine out in the Mallee. You'll realize you've been paying full price for something the old-timers got for almost free, and you'll never quite trust the expensive answer the same way again. That's the feeling I want to leave you with. Not that you found a clever trick, that you stopped losing something you never should have been losing in the first place. Money that was quietly leaking out of your home, month after month, while you were told the only answer was to use less and pay more. Because if you've watched this far, I reckon I know the kind of person you are. You're not someone who takes the expensive version of a simple truth just because a clever advertisement told you to. You're someone who wants to understand how a thing actually works, so you can never be fooled on it again. And that's the whole reason these old ways matter. They put the understanding back in your own two hands. So let me ask you something, and I genuinely want you to answer. Did anyone in your family ever do this? A grandmother with a box on the back step, a father who wrapped the pot in a blanket, an old aunt who had a draft snake on every door, and a heavy curtain she pulled the second the sun went down. Or is this the first you've ever heard of the fireless cooker? Tell me down in the comments, and tell me which corner of the country you're watching from, because I want to know where these old ways held on the longest. City or bush, north or south, I want to hear it. And if this changed the way you look at that bill on your bench, then come along with me. Not to follow a channel, to join up with the rest of us who are done believing the convenient lie that saving money has to cost money first. There's a whole crowd of us now, quietly holding on to our heat and our dollars, and we're growing. Because next time I'm going to show you the old bush way of keeping food cold and fresh for weeks without a fridge running day and night, a method they used in the hottest parts of this country, decades before electricity ever reached the outback, and it works on your kitchen bench right now. That one cost me even more years of believing the wrong thing. And once you see how simple it is, you'll be just as filthy as I am that nobody ever told you. So don't open that next bill just yet. Go and boil a pot, wrap it in a blanket, and prove it to yourself first. I did, and I've never looked back. This video showed you why your heat leaks away, but the full dollar heat holding method, step by step, the way those old bush cooks did it, is waiting for you inside the Bush Wisdom Circle. In there you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be doing it alone. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen. It takes a minute, and you can cancel any time.